Welcome back. We will continue our series of lectures by turning to the philosopher Aristotle. In our previous set of lectures, we were introduced to the pre-Socratics and Plato. The pre-Socratic period marked the shift from myth or story to a reasonable account, but their accounts offered difficulties, some of which Plato attempted to solve. Aristotle continues this tradition, taking on some of the problems of the pre-Socratics while also trying to build upon Plato. This doesn't mean that Aristotle accepts everything Plato says. Rather, he modifies Plato where he thinks Plato went wrong. But he is much closer to Plato than mere appearance tells us. And so in this lecture, we will turn to Aristotle in order to see if he can help us understand and answer the question, what is philosophy? And why would anyone dedicate their lives to it? To do this, we will briefly discuss who Aristotle is, and then his worldview, that is, his metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics. And after we look at his worldview, we will finally discuss his influence. So let's get started. So first off, who was Aristotle? Aristotle was one of the most influential ancient Greek philosophers, both in his day and ours. He is known for shaping our Western tradition's thought in terms of how we think about logic, ethics, politics, science, and metaphysics. He was born in 384 BC and died in 322 BC. He was also a student of Plato for about 20 years or so, and so he knew the teachings of Plato very well. His most famous student was Alexander the Great, the man who attempted to conquer the world. So while Alexander the Great attempted to conquer the world with military force, Aristotle conquered the ancient Greek and even medieval world with his ideas. Earlier, it was said that Aristotle built upon the contributions of Plato. This is clearly seen when we consider the historical context in relation to Aristotle's method of reasoning. In the 5th century BC, before the time of both Plato and Aristotle, democracy was becoming increasingly popular in Greece. Democracy is the rule that moves political power into the hands of the people. Now, there were some thinkers at that time known as sophists. The sophists were really clever, but unlike the philosopher, the sophist does not care about wisdom. Rather, the sophist sells their knowledge for wealth or political gain. So the sophists, as clever and cunning thinkers, knew that democracy was becoming increasingly popular. They knew that the people had political power. So the question for them was this: how do we sophists gain political power and take it from the people? Well, they thought, we can influence them with our arguments and rhetoric. We can persuade them to freely give their power to us, or at least do our own bidding for us, thinking that this is for their own good. And so that's exactly what the sophists did. And that's exactly what happened to the people in Greece. Now, after a century or so, Socrates, Plato's teacher, enters the scene. Socrates did not like the sophists because he thought that reason and argument were meant to be used to pursue philosophy and to discover wisdom, and that philosophy, reason, and argument is not done or pursued for the sake of deception or for the sake of money and power. So from this, Socrates developed what we call the Socratic method, the method where we begin with a question and ask the person, or even ourselves, yes or no questions to find an answer and to see whether that answer contradicts our own view or not. And this method was a breakthrough in philosophy. Socrates was able to show that the sophists were fakers. They did not have the wisdom they pretended to have. Unfortunately, while Socrates successfully showed that the sophists did not know what they were talking about, the people were still heavily influenced by them. So much so that Socrates was sentenced to death by the court through the appeal of democracy. So in short, Socrates made the first breakthrough in logic. He established a method that refutes sophistry. But this cannot be the whole of logic. The whole of logic does not merely prove things false. We also use logic to prove things true. And this is where Aristotle comes in. Aristotle accepts Socrates' method and even develops it. Aristotle's contribution was to show that we can use reason in order to positively prove things. Previously, we tried to justify Plato's importance by noting that both 20th and 21st century thinkers believe all of philosophy after Plato to be akin to footnotes to him and his works. If that's the case, then it might equally be true to say that all of our developments and thoughts on logic are footnotes to Aristotle. So, while both Plato and Aristotle were old ancient Greek thinkers, their contributions to philosophy are immense. They're practically timeless. The fact that their contributions are practically timeless suggests one thing. And of course, we'll have to put this to the test. But it suggests that what they say may actually be true. Having looked at Aristotle's method, we can turn to his metaphysics. We'll look at his metaphysics first because metaphysics studies being, what is. There is a sense in which we can't know what a good life is or what a human being is if we don't first grasp the meaning of being itself, of what is. Aristotle noticed that all beings can be divided into two groups: substance or essence, and accidents. The essence or substance is the unchangeable whatness of a thing. It is the thing that makes something to be what it is. For example, we don't say that fur makes a dog what it is. We can shave the fur off a dog, and the dog will still remain a dog. So fur is not a substance or essence. It is not essential to the dog. The dogness, whatever that is what makes a dog a dog. So since fur is not essential to a dog, meaning that it does not make a dog to be what it is, it means that fur is an accident. An accident here does not mean not doing something on purpose. An accident here means something that is not a defining characteristic of a species of a thing. So in short, all beings are divided into substance and accidents. Substance or essence is the inherent whatness, what something is. An accident is an attribute that does not define the thing to be what it is. Accidents are attributes of things. Now, there are even two kinds of accidents: separable accidents and inseparable accidents. A separable accident is an attribute that can change. For example, a piercing is a separable accident. A piercing does not make you what you are, and it can easily be added or removed. But there are also inseparable accidents. An inseparable accident is an attribute that cannot change. For example, your natural hair color does not change. You might be able to dye your hair, but your natural hair and the natural hair color remains the same. Even through aging, our hair might begin to gray, but this is due to the hair molecules weakening, not because our natural hair color changes. Now, Aristotle's distinction between separable and inseparable accidents is really important, and it's something that is typically overlooked by philosophers in our own day. The easiest way to see this is through an example of a political issue in our own day. People debate about gender identity, specifically whether gender identity is fluid and changeable, or whether it is static and something that cannot change. Well, we know gender isn't a substance. It doesn't exist on its own. It's an attribute. It's something we say of someone. So this is where the debate lies. If gender is a separable accident, like getting a piercing, then gender is fluid and changeable. But if gender is an inseparable accident, like one's natural hair color, then gender is not fluid and changeable. Now, unfortunately, in our own day, modern philosophers have forgotten the purpose of Aristotle's logic and metaphysics. They treat Aristotle like a museum piece rather than someone who has something worthwhile to contribute to our own modern discussions. But when we do that, when we treat someone like Aristotle as a museum piece, then we fail to appreciate the contributions of such a great thinker. But the distinction between substance and accident is not the only contribution of Aristotle to metaphysics. Aristotle also discovered what we might call the four causes. Whenever we are looking for the cause of something, we are trying to answer the question, why? Aristotle notes that when we want to know what something is, there are four why questions that we have to answer. First, we have to figure out what the thing is made out of, and we call this the material cause. Second, we have to figure out the structure or shape the thing takes, and we call this the formal cause. Third, we have to figure out who or what made the thing, and we call this the efficient cause. And finally, we have to figure out what the thing is made for, and we call this the final cause. And to see this in action, let's take an example. Let's take a statue. What is the material cause of the statue? The material cause of a statue may be, let's say, marble. The marble is the stuff the statue is made out of. The formal cause is the figure itself, the figure of, say, a human being. The marble takes the shape or structure of a human being. The marble isn't just some lump, it takes a form or shape. Well, what about the efficient cause? The efficient cause is the person who made the statue. The statue was probably made by a sculptor. And finally, the final cause is the purpose that the statue was made for. The purpose of the statue is beauty, something to be admired. Aristotle notes that when we come to know the causes of a thing, we are able to grasp not only what that thing is, but why that thing exists in the first place. The ultimate cause of all things, in Aristotle's view, is God. God is the uncaused cause, or the unmoved mover. Interestingly, Aristotle did not believe in the existence of God because he was religious. Rather, he believed that God exists through the use of human natural reason. He thought that we could give a rational account for the existence of God. In Aristotle's view, then, when the philosopher seeks wisdom, the philosopher is actually seeking the knowledge that God has, a knowledge and wisdom that is both supreme and perfect. Having looked at Aristotle's metaphysics, we can now turn to his epistemology, his account of how we come to know anything at all. Aristotle teaches that all of our knowledge begins with the senses. We first encounter the world through sight, hearing, touch, taste, and smell. But while knowledge begins with the senses, it does not follow that our knowledge ends there. If it did, we would only ever know isolated facts about particular things. Aristotle thinks that we can do much more than that. Here is how Aristotle thinks knowledge develops. First, we begin with sense experience. We encounter particular things. This particular tree, that particular dog, this particular human being. From this, we move to repeated experience, and repeated experiences that form memories. The mind stores these encounters of the particular experiences that we had. From memories, the mind begins to notice patterns. We start to see similarities across many cases in our experience. Afterwards, reason then grasps the universal, the unchanging whatness or essence. And this is the crucial step. the mind is able to abstract the essence or whatness from the many particular examples that we experience. And for Aristotle, this grasp of the essence is what genuine knowledge consists in. To see how this works, let's consider an example. Let's consider human mortality. We observe through experience that human beings die. We see individuals grow old, weaken, and eventually their bodily functions cease. But how do we know that all human beings die? How do we know that this is true for all human beings and not just the ones that we have personally observed? This is where reason steps in. We reflect on what it means to be a living, embodied creature. Living things depend on bodily organs and faculties. These organs are made of matter, and matter is subject to corruption and decay and change. When the bodily organs can no longer perform their functions, the organism as a whole ceases to live. And from this, reason grasps a universal truth, that all embodied living things are mortal. And since human beings are embodied living things, we have a body, it follows that human beings are mortal. Notice what happened here. We did not simply pile up many experiences and then guess that the same thing will probably happen in the future. Rather, we used experience as a starting point and then used reason to understand why things are the way they are. Reason allows us to move from the particular to the universal. It allows us to move from this person died or these people died to all human beings are mortal. This brings us to an important point. Modern philosophers often worry about what's called the problem of induction. It's the problem of how can we know a universal statement if we haven't observed every single particular case? Aristotle shows us that this is only a problem if we think that knowledge comes from counting cases and if we think that things don't have an essence or an intrinsic whatness that we can grasp. Once reason understands what a thing is, it also understands what necessarily follows from that essence. So when we know that human beings are embodied living beings made of corruptible matter, we can see that mortality is not a guess based on many examples. Rather, it is a necessary truth grounded in what a human being is. And in this way, Aristotle avoids the modern problem of induction altogether. And so in short, knowledge begins in the senses, but it is completed by reason. Reason allows us to grasp the unchanging essence of things, the very same essence we discussed in Aristotle's metaphysics. And once we grasp that essence, we can understand the necessary truths that follow from it. This finally takes us to Aristotle's anthropology and ethics. Anthropology answers the question, what is a human being? While ethics answers the question, what does it mean to be a good human being? Notice how we can't actually answer what a good human being is if we don't first know what a human being is. This is a crucial point. If we misunderstand what we are as human beings, then we can't have a proper understanding of what makes a good person. So, what is a human being? Aristotle claims that a human being is a rational animal, a being that is not just soul alone, not just body alone, but a unity of body and rational soul together. And there seems to be some merit to this. If human beings were just bodies alone without souls, then why aren't we like rocks? If someone says, well, rocks don't have organs, we can simply ask why our organs function in the first place. What makes them work? It seems that there must be something that animates the body, and we call this the soul. But human beings aren't souls alone either. And this is where Aristotle begins disagreeing with Plato. If human beings were souls alone, not bodies, then if someone slapped your body, let's say, then you shouldn't feel that slap. Typically, someone hits us, or if someone hits us, we say, "Ouch, you hit me." But if we are not our bodies, then it wouldn't be us who were hit. It would be like someone hitting our, say, backpack or something else that we own. We don't feel pain when someone slaps our backpacks or some other thing that we own, because we aren't the backpack or we aren't that thing that we own. Rather, the backpack is something that we own. But we do feel pain when someone hits our bodies. That means we aren't our soul alone. This is why Aristotle says that we are neither body alone nor soul alone. Rather, we are a composition. We are body and soul together. But we don't have just any soul. Plants, in Aristotle's view, also have souls because they are alive. Whatever is living has a soul. But not all souls are equal. Plants and animals are both living things, but they are not the same. Plants, for example, aren't aware of their surroundings, while animals are. And so while both have souls, plants have what are called nutritive souls, meaning that they can take in food and grow, while animals have a more complex soul that includes sensation. Human beings are similar to other animals in this respect. Human beings and other animals can both sense things and even have memory. But the difference is that human beings can philosophize, while other animals cannot. We can ask questions like, what is philosophy, or what is the good life? But animals don't ask these kinds of questions. They simply live life. They don't reflect upon it. And so while animals have a sensitive soul, meaning a soul with sensation, experience, and memory, human beings have a rational soul, a soul that is capable of understanding the what and the why of things. And so what is a human being in Aristotle's view? A human being is a rational animal. This brings us to Aristotle's ethics. Ethics deals with living rightly or wrongly. In ethics, we don't care about just living life. That's something other animals can do. Rather, we care about living the good life. And to live the good life, we have to ask what the good life is, and we have to try to figure out what the good life is using reason. We have to live in accordance with the thing that makes us most human, our reason. This doesn't mean that we are to neglect our bodies, but it does mean that reason has to take the driver's seat, and that our emotions and feelings have to follow reason, rather than reason follow our emotions and feelings. Aristotle shows us that in order to be a good person, we have to pay attention to our character. We have to form good habits, and we have to avoid bad ones. A good habit is called a virtue. A bad habit is called a vice. So if we want to be good people, we need to be virtuous and avoid vice. Now, since virtue and vice are habits, we have to ask, how are habits formed? They are formed through continued, repeated actions. If we do one good act, that doesn't mean that we're now good people. We have to do repeated good acts. And we can't just do those repeated good acts by accident. We have to do them freely. We have to choose them. And we cannot be good without choosing to be good. So just as there are different parts of the human person, our reason, our will, and our emotions, there are also different virtues that correspond to these different parts. The virtue for our reason is prudence and wisdom. The virtue for the will is justice. The virtue for our emotions are fortitude and temperance. Fortitude or courage is the virtue for our fight or flight emotions. It teaches us to pick our battles. Temperance is the virtue for our pleasure and pain emotions. It helps us take pleasure in the things that we should, and it helps us avoid taking pleasure in the things that are not good for us. And so, what can we learn from all of Aristotle's insights? Earlier, we talked about how in philosophy, there are really three things to pay attention to: the object of study, us the subjects, and the act of knowing, what we are doing as we experience, understand, make judgments, and what follows from that as our own actions. Aristotle helps us to consider each of these aspects. He covers basically everything: the study of the natural world, logic, metaphysics, ethics, politics, and you name it. He shows us that we also have to pay attention to what we are doing when we philosophize. We can know what we are by paying attention to the activity of knowing and what is assumed in that activity. For example, there is a common view in our own day that we cannot know the truth as it is. That truth is subjective, based only on our own perspectives. But when we pay attention to what we are doing when we make that claim, we notice that we are making an objective statement. We are claiming to know something about truth. And so, if it's true that we can't know the truth as it is, then we can't even know that statement. So Aristotle helps us to see that contradiction. Finally, Aristotle shows us that we also have to pay attention to ourselves as subjects. We have to make sure that we are virtuous. If we aren't virtuous, if we aren't living good lives, then we can't discover truth. Think of it like having foggy glasses. A person with foggy glasses cannot see clearly. Similarly, a person with a foggy soul, a soul clouded by vice, cannot clearly see or perceive the truth. And even if such a person could see the truth somehow, they would not be able to love it. So Aristotle shows us that we need to pay attention to ourselves. We have to know what we are and our own strengths and weaknesses. Aristotle also gives us the tools we need for this kind of self-knowledge. He helps us understand our material cause, what we are made of. Science does a great job uncovering this. Aristotle helps us to think about our formal cause, the thing that makes us what we are, our whatness. We have a rational soul. Aristotle helps us reflect on our efficient cause, where we come from, where the human species arose, or let me backtrack a little bit, whether the human species arose through evolution or something else. All right, that's the efficient cause. Where did the human species come from? Was it through evolution or was it through some other cause? And finally, Aristotle helps us raise questions about our final cause, our purpose. What is the purpose of a human being? What were we made for? Socrates says that part of wisdom is knowing ourselves. Aristotle gives us the tools we need to do that, to have self-knowledge. And so the question for us is whether we will say yes to this invitation, an invitation to know ourselves, and an invitation to live not just any life, but the good life.